Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 25th of November, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have with me in the studio, Ben Rubin. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Brian.
Great that you're here. And we'll be joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, live link from Scotland. Now, I'd just like to say, as you can probably see from the backdrop, it's a truly lovely day here in Plymouth. We've survived the weekend of storms, pretty unpleasant, flooding. So if you're one of the people who've been affected out there, we are thinking of you. And of course, people have had some really bad experiences in those high winds. But most of us have survived, and the sun's shining today, which is good. Now, we're going to get straight off with matters to do with the weather, and what better place to start than COP29, which didn't go as well as attended. Let's have a look at this as intended. Let's have a look at this little video clip.
No deal's better than a bad deal, chanted some protesters overnight.
Our so-called leaders are negotiating away the future of our children's right at this very moment.
COP negotiations routinely go down to the wire, through it and out the other side. This year's deadline, over 24 hours ago. This afternoon, the Association of Small Island States walked out in disgust.
We came here to this COP for a fair deal. We feel that we haven't been heard and there's a deal to be made, and we have not been consulted.
The $300 billion on the table, nothing like what island states and developing nations say they need each year to protect them from climate change.
Well, there we are. That was Channel 4 with lots of images showing that we're all going to drown as a result of climate change, but of course no real proof for this agenda. 300 billion agenda, not big enough, but that pales into insignificance against the trillions for war. Let's have a look at this tweet, though, to see what else is coming. This is Labour MP Bill Esterson. He said that ordinary people will absolutely have to adjust their habits if it's to meet the UK's emissions goal for 2030. So let's bring him in. Net zero targets will force people to, quote, change their lives, says Labour's chair of Energy Committee. So they're going to drive the climate change through and the energy changes in order to supposedly save the world. And our behaviour is going to have to change if they're going to get this programme through. This is the only tip of the iceberg, Ben. What have you got?
Yes, the heart bleeds, doesn't it? They missed their funding target. It's a real shame, but don't worry. They know where all of the money is, and they've already issued a plan over the weekend. I've seen this. This is the COP29 finance staircase that came from Global Optimism, I believe, is where the page that I picked it up from. And they've already identified that bilateral public finance, multilateral development banks, an expansion of the contributor base, which is basically a whip round to people, innovative sources, which is creating really exotic financial instruments that just sound, frankly, dangerous. I mean, we're venturing into financial crisis territory with the kind of things that they're proposing. And also private finance, which is usurious lending by rich families and corporations, is going to fill the funding gap. It will get them to the $1 trillion, and they're just going to keep on pressing on, right? This is going in one direction only. And they've got big plans through to the next COP, COP30, which happens next year, 2025. And that is very much centered around this new organization, which launched earlier on in the summer, but has really ramped up over COP29. So this is Mission 2025. It's a coalition of businesses, mayors, investors, cultural leaders, health leaders, scientists and youth activists inviting governments to ratchet upcoming national climate plans in line with the Paris Agreement target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, because later is too late. All right, we've got to do it. They've got a plan. There's 3 steps to it. It's about finance, energy and nature and food. They've got to identify the key asks. They've got to craft evidenced, tested messaging frames. Imagine that. I don't know what a messaging frame is, but it sounds great, doesn't it? It's basically propaganda, what we're talking about here. And then they need to recruit and amplify a diverse chorus of messengers to petition government and get media coverage. They've already been featured in the Financial Times, Reuters, Business Green, whatever that is. It's a new thing. I've just come across it, and they're extraordinarily well backed, as you'd expect. It's been convened by Global Optimism, who we've spoken about over the past couple of weeks, the Bezos Earth Fund, so Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men alive, and something called the Systems Change Lab. And there is a whole ecosystem of organizations who are participating in funding and progressing this agenda. You can see C40 cities there at the bottom of that slide, who we've talked about a lot. There are 75 other partners listed on this website. This is a focal point. We're going to be talking about it over the next 12 months, I'm sure. But also, don't forget, this is already playing out on the ground. This last week from 3CI, the Cities Commission for Climate Investment, where we can see Sheffield City's leadership team boasting that we are acting and thinking like the major core city we are, as they joined 3CI's roundtable to make the strong case for investment into Sheffield's decarbonisation plans. In the foreground, you can see their Sheffield City Council, represented by Tom Hunt, and to his right, someone from Infra Capital, and then someone from Barclays, right? This is the public-private marketplace, the fascist marketplace that is being used to roll out this system. It's happening on the front line of local government right now.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. And we'll just add to that occasionally we've got viewers and listeners who are saying, why is it the UK column's got such a focus on what's happening around climate? It is because when you dig into the subject, this is the baseline driving everything. It's there in defence, security, health. Every aspect of our lives is actually going to be controlled using this weapon of climate change. So people have really got to understand what it's about. Now, Diane, will academics be speaking out as a result of their concerns about some of this government propaganda?
99.9% of them will not be, Brian and Ben, and hello. But those of us who are members of Academics for Academic Freedom will certainly do our best to do so. I'm happy to give a report on the Academics for Academic Freedom annual conference that I attended over the weekend down in London. It was a really, really great day with some very sad stories and some very sad results. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Edinburgh branch of Academics for Academic Freedom. And I'm proud to say that I am also on the banned list that highlights those of us who have been banned and silenced, regardless of what side our views fall on in any particular situation. There are people from all over universities on all different levels on this list who have been highlighted for being silenced or being told that they can't say what they want to say. And you can read my entire statement on the ban list, which will be in the show notes. But I will just say that part of mine says, I have learned the hard way that in EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion culture, inclusion means exclusion if your mob decides that you belong to the wrong groups. And that's just how mine has gone. I will say very sadly as well, a very important member of the ban list is a student who took his own life this year. Earlier this month, he was a student in Oxford, and he was essentially, I guess we could say, a victim of cancel culture and was ostracized from his peer group, which of course is very important to young people. And because of his persecution, they found his body dead in the Thames River. It's a very, very sad story. And he is also highlighted as well on this website. The statement of academic freedom can be signed on our website by anyone who's basically ever been to the university. Feel free to add your name if you've ever been to university or graduate of anywhere, which basically says that we believe that academics, both inside and outside the classroom, have unrestricted liberty to question and test received wisdom and to put forward controversial and unpopular opinions, whether or not they are deemed offensive, and that institutions have no right to curb the exercise of this freedom by members of their staff or to use it as grounds for disciplinary action or dismissal, which unfortunately is not the experience of pretty much any of us who have been members of this group. There's our group photo at the end of the day celebrating freedom. We were very happy to celebrate everything that we had done during the day. It was held at Conway Hall in central London, which was a site where George Orwell spoke in the past. There's been a long history of anarchists and so on. It was very good spirit of a place to have this event held because of just things that have happened in the past there. So we were really in the company of good people from our backgrounds. I was also there with Joe Phoenix and lots of other people here. For example, is this guy who said that astronauts for space travel is basically similar to academics for academic freedom. It really shouldn't have to exist. It should be self-explanatory, but here we are with this particular situation, unfortunately. We had also some other interesting talks. One in particular were some students for academics for academic freedom, who I hope to interview sometime in the near future for UK Column. And some of the students are very, very concerned about the environment that they're learning in. They actually called it 1984. And these were students from various universities around the UK feeling like they are silenced. They can't speak. They just want to get on with what they want to do with their studies. And they're hoping that other academics, lecturers, and professors will support them in their quest to be able to express and explore views, which is the point of university, we would hope, in the first place. I met a wonderful lady from a group called Free Speech Wales. So those of you in Wales really should find out about this. This is on the Academics for Academic Freedom website, but she also has a Twitter account. And I learned a little bit more about Wales. And Wales, as we know, has some serious problems. We all know about maybe the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, but in terms of free speech and what is going on there is particularly concerning. There are things about anti-racist Wales, which is a Welsh government policy. It's a long document. You can look at what they're doing to try to be so-called anti-racist as much as possible. And we have from my profession, we have inclusive futures, which basically says things like, for example, you should not hold events in buildings that are named after dead white people because that is racist. And so you should look for other venues to hold your library events. Something that's come out in the media very recently is asking whether dog walking is racist, because there are people from certain cultures and backgrounds who don't feel comfortable around dogs. So you shouldn't take your dogs to the park because it might be offensive to people who come from those cultures. This one right here was Abhishek Shah, who was professor of maths at Queen Mary University of London, who gave a lot of good background and updates on the Academic Freedom, Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act that was started in place by the Conservatives actually in 2019, and Bridget Phillipson has halted it. So I want to go just into a bit of what was going on with this legislation. There's a full report that I did from this in the earlier stages in September 2024, and let's just watch this quick clip from that time, and then we'll see where we got to from there. What did Bridget say again back in September?
In more detail.
Shadow Minister Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State to her place? The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act 2023 would have ensured that universities in England have the tools they need to deal with interference and threats to freedom of speech and academic freedom wherever they originate. Now the Act will no longer be implemented by this government, will the Secretary of State clarify to the House what her alternative plans are to protect academic freedom in the higher educational sector?
The Honourable Gentleman will know that freedom of expression and academic freedom are incredibly important. There are duties that the Office for Students sets out. Many of these principles are already enshrined in law. But I want to make sure that we get this right. And I'm confident that the Honourable Gentleman would not want to be in a position where the Act might have opened up the potential for hate speech, including Holocaust denial, to be spread on campus, something that the previous Minister in the last government was unable to rule out.
So that was what we heard in September. And on the 10th of October, we had an urgent question that was put to the House of Commons to ask the Secretary of State if she will make a statement on freedom of speech in universities. And here is the end of that discussion, which was between Conservative MP Jerome Mayhew and Catherine McKennell, who is the Minister for School Standards.
Jerome May. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act isn't a government scheme that is being paused. It is an act of Parliament which has received royal assent. So that is a very serious decision to take to stop that in its tracks. So it must have been based on serious evidence. Can the Minister set out what that evidence was? And given that the need to defend freedom of speech is now, how long is this process going to take?
Minister. I agree with the Honourable Gentleman that this is a serious issue, and it was a serious and important decision to make, because we need to make sure we have the right foundations in place for long-term securing of free speech in higher education. We will consult with all the groups who have an interest in ensuring we get this right. We're listening to the concerns of those that were concerned about the Act and its implications. We're also listening to those who supported many of the measures within the Act and would like to see action taken to ensure freedom of speech in higher education. And that is why because of the seriousness of this issue, that we have stepped back to ensure we take that pragmatic and long-term approach.
So that was a bit of waffle, or quite a bit of waffle, if you ask me. Where we are now is, as of earlier this month, Bridget Phillipson is being taken to court by the Free Speech Union. The Free Speech Union is basically calling that essentially what she's doing is unlawful, of course. And so that case is going to be held, I believe, early in 2025, I think January 2025. So hopefully I'll have an update after that takes place. But I don't think we're seeing anything encouraging from the Labour government at this point that is really protecting freedom of speech at all whatsoever, and especially not in this case for universities.
Yep, Diane, agree with that. No free speech for the public, but of course, free speech for the politicians. So let's have a listen to what Keir Starmer had to say a day ago.
Thousands of jobs in defence in our part of the world, including Abbey Wood at Filton. Storm Shadow missiles are made there. Your government has not confirmed or denied that they've been used on Russian territory. But there are a lot of people in defence and a lot of people very worried about what's going on right now in Ukraine. Are we at war?
No, we're not at war, but Ukraine certainly is, because Ukraine has been invaded by Russia, and that war has now been going on for just over 1,000 days. That's 1,000 days of aggression from Russia and 1,000 days of sacrifice for Ukraine. And that is why we've said consistently that we stand by Ukraine. We cannot allow Putin to win this war.
Despite the fact that he said it's going global.
Well, there's irresponsible rhetoric.
Well, there we are. Where is the irresponsible rhetoric coming from? In my opinion, it's straight out of the mouth of Keir Starmer. He is fomenting war. UK has clearly been involved in helping to foment regime change and the resulting war in the Donbass. Russia now dragged in. And we are very, very close to a major escalation. And Keir Starmer trying to reassure the nation that really there's nothing in it and we shouldn't worry at all. But we cannot allow Putin to win. That was the key statement. And I'll be taking you into why he's actually saying that. But first of all, let's remind ourselves that if Keir Starmer had that to say, what did Tony Blair have to say about weapons of mass destruction? Well, of course, many people believe that he deliberately lied to the nation. The subsequent investigation suggested that intelligence analysis was a little bit weak and a bit misguided, but many people saw through that to say that Tony Blair lied over weapons of mass destruction in order to foment a war at the time. So let's have a look at Ukraine, and this is obviously from the Kiev Post. Opinion: Ukraine will win. Ukraine is not a burden to the West, but a valuable investment. But the reality is that the Ukraine defences are collapsing at the moment, and amidst the fighting, the slaughter is truly horrific, and I will say on both sides, but Ukraine is taking the worst of it. But this is the reality pointed out in the Kiev Post article, that of course Ukraine is asset rich, and this is one of the maps showing Ukraine's oil and gas prospects, and you will see that there's a band in the east of the country which is very close to where the fighting is actually going on at the moment. If we have a look at this map, we can also see that there are mineral reserves, and the darker brown colour shows that the best of these assets are in the east of the country, again where the fighting is taking place. So this article pointing out the wealth of Ukraine, and let's see what this journalist Diane Francis has to say. She says that President Zelensky wants American businesses to invest in his country's natural resources worth some $26 trillion equivalent to Canada's or Australia's mineral wealth. So we're into big bucks. Zelensky also pledges that Ukraine's military will help protect Europe's security after the war. Well, this is very reassuring from the most corrupt country in Europe, and one where we've seen vile things happening, not only on the battlefield, but against the Ukrainian population by those military patrols, literally dragging people off the streets to die on the front lines. But she goes on, and she's talking about Putin. She says he's a trillionaire tycoon who controls a nasty oligarchy that has exploited and harvested the resources of Ukraine and other former colonies for decades, as did the Tsars before them. Ben, doesn't that sound a bit like the West?
It certainly does sound like the West.
I was just stunned because she's saying one thing, but I think I know where the badge pins. Let's see what else she had to say. If the war costs $500 billion and Russia loses its $350 billion in frozen assets seized by Western banks, the capture of $26 trillion in resources, or even half or a quarter of that, represents a spectacular return on investment. This war is simply a return on investment. It's about making a few bucks, 26 trillion altogether. She says that the West has been enormously generous to Ukraine and deserves to be rewarded and reimbursed for its military and humanitarian aid expenditures. The West can also help rebuild the country. But of course, what this lady doesn't talk about is the circa 400,000 dead Ukrainians and probably about 1 million casualties. But not to worry about those, because the dead and the mutilated were absolutely so worth it for the West's plan. So there's no doubt what's going on here. This is about grabbing the assets of Ukraine, and we can be sure that the US, UK, European Union had their eyes set on those assets at £26 trillion worth of minerals, oil and gas, well before the trouble unleashed in Ukraine itself. So a fermented war in order to asset grab those riches. But of course, unfortunately, the war has not gone as the US and the UK and the West expected. And Russia is now holding the upper hand, which is why our Prime Minister says that Putin must be stopped at all costs. Of course, Keir Starmer, because the West must rape those assets as fast as possible. Now, after the ad break, I'm going to be looking into a bit more detail about how that rape is going to take place. And of course, it features BlackRock as an immensely powerful global company to drive the agenda. But if you like what the UK column is doing, then please support us. We can only do what we do with your financial support. You can help us by making a donation, or of course you can join us for a monthly membership at £5. You can take out an annual membership if you prefer, or as some people do, join us with a lifetime membership. This is extremely helpful. And I'll also add, you can make a purchase in the shop. Winter is coming up, and also Christmas. Well, winter's upon us. We're not selling long johns and thermals at the moment, but there are some very good hoodies and warm hats. And if you're interested in health, then of course you can purchase product from Clive de Carle, and we get a small percentage of those purchases. Please share the information. We're putting this information out to share, and of course it's out on the main platforms. But if you're a signed up member with UK Column, then you can also make comments and share comments within the community. So this is all good stuff. Now, I have just done another interview with the black lady, Sam Nass, the mother who had her children taken away from her. So that's part 3. This will be streamed tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And this is Sam's fight against what we're called the gulag of the family courts. Let's just have a look at the video clip here with Sam protesting and her subsequent arrest outside the Cabinet Office.
My children were stolen by Salford City Council when I survived human trafficking. I challenge the court, now they're trying to cover up the abuse. Sakia Starmer is legally trained, he knows this is a human right.
Sorry, if you just bring me back on screen, please, Stephanie. Bundled into the back of that police van by a total of 6 police officers. One officer, Sam, was very uncomfortable with the way he was touching her during the arrest. But the whole saga, disgraceful. Keir Starmer, as a local MP, of course, doesn't want to get near the subject. Meanwhile, this mother's forced to go onto the street with a megaphone to try and tell the story as to how her children have been stolen by the British state. So join me for that interview at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Now, let's pop this one back. I just wanted to say that I've had some really interesting emails as a result of my interview with my interview with Stephen Sizer on Christian Zionism. And I've had some really nice emails. I've also had some challenging emails. But the most important point for me is that we've now finally got some open debate going on the subject of Christian Zionism and why we need to understand it and its power to influence what is happening in the Middle East at the moment. Now, I'd also like to say a big thank you to the council policy to the people who are taking on the councils for their policy and plans. That's the Advisory Concerned Citizens Advisory Assembly. And they sent me through a little video clip. This is the first video of their October Zoom call, where teams of people can come in to talk about what's happening with the councils and what can be done to actually challenge councils where they're bringing in inappropriate policy. So there's the web address for that. Get on, have a look at it. And this is giving ordinary people the opportunity to really stand up and challenge and to have their voice heard. We've also got this for Edinburgh Peace March. This will be at 12:30, Saturday the 30th of November. And the start point for the rally will be the grass area adjacent to the Scottish Parliament. So if you're up there in Scotland, north of the border, another a valuable demonstration going on where people are prepared to stand up and challenge not only the government north of the border, but also, of course, in Westminster as to why we're just being dragged into these horrific wars, whether it's in Ukraine or the Middle East or further afield. So let's return to the subject of Ukraine. And BlackRock is the company, and this is the key bit to understand, that BlackRock has undertaken a memorandum of understanding with Ukraine. So basically, they've signed this MOU whereby BlackRock will provide advisory support for designing an investment framework. It goes on to give a little bit more detail, but essentially that framework is for future reconstruction and recovery. Well, the war hasn't finished. The slaughter is getting worse in a desperation to stop the Russian advance on the battlefield. But don't worry, because as the journalist from the Kiev newspaper said, there's trillions to be made out of a successful resolution to this war. Now, if we have a look across the internet, there's a lot of information about this, so please search for yourself. One of the key things is that BlackRock has got the power of 10 trillion in investments behind it. And I've used the word magic there. I'm talking about black magic in producing money for Ukraine. So that was the headline, but across the internet, we've got many different headlines. Zelensky, BlackRock CEO, Fink agree to coordinate Ukraine investment. BlackRock and JP Morgan back 15 billion fund to rebuild Ukraine. Ukraine Reconstruction Bank eyes nearly 1 billion in committed capital. And a small one there talking about BlackRock and JP Morgan again. So why do we need to pay attention to this? with respect to Keir Starmer casually saying we're not at war with the Russians. Well, of course, behind the scenes, Keir Starmer absolutely in bed with BlackRock. Now, I know I've used an open democracy source here. We don't support open democracy in its wider emissions, but this article was on the button. And here we have the BlackRock letters inside Labour's close partnership. And Jonathan Reynolds told the investment bank that he looked forward to working together to change the face of our United Kingdom. So we've got a 10 trillion funded organisation going to change our lives. But what this article picked up is an exchange through to government officials themselves from BlackRock. This was the man at the centre of the storm, we will say, Anthony Manchester, and he sent an email to Jonathan Reynolds saying, "Dear Secretary of State, on behalf of all of us here at BlackRock, please find attached a formal letter of congratulations from myself and our UK chair, Sandra Boss. And may I add, on a personal note, it is a pleasure after all these years to address you as such." Now, this was a fawning email, and there's good reason for it, because if we go and have a look at the background of this man, we can see that before BlackRock, he was a member of the Common Council City of London Corporation, financial and economic councillor, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, HM Treasury, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Cabinet Office, and HM Treasury. So straight out of deep government into a 10 trillion BlackRock company, where he then, with his colleagues, effectively steps back into the inner sanctum to be entertained by Keir Starmer in order to get BlackRock policy in Ukraine unfolded. As I take you through this particular section, what is in my mind is the slaughter which is taking place on the battlefield. Thousands of men dying a day. Does the West care about this? Does Keir Starmer want peace? Well, he wants peace, but only if UK can be at the forefront of grabbing those Ukrainian assets. I find, Ben, this stuff is just horrific when you really get into it. And of course, none of the mainstream media or the BBC are taking the lid off what's really happening here, but it's truly sickening. We have got one article from the National, so well done for the Scots. Keir Starmer slammed over gushing tweet about the BlackRock meeting. And this was an interesting one here from Clive Lewis MP. He says, for those attempting to make sense of Trump's victory and the rise of the far right across Europe, look no further than the PM's statement below. Whether you like it or not, the far right has a set of common narratives. We can probably all recite them. So Clive Lewis pointing a finger at the far right, but the tweet he uses is none other than Keir Starmer saying, "I'm determined to deliver growth, create wealth, and put money in people's pockets. This can only be achieved by working in partnership with leading businesses like BlackRock to capitalise on the UK's position as a world-leading hub for investment." Now, I thought of you as I put this slide together, Ben, because essentially this is government and big business entwined. This is fascism. And the West, and UK in particular, helped foment a war where perhaps 400,000, maybe 500,000 men have died, plus probably 1 million wounded and maimed. That was created in order to get hands on these on this 26 trillion of Ukrainian assets. So I think this is pretty unpleasant. And I'm just going to add to it that if we dig into the Labour Party itself, we've got some very interesting things coming to the surface. This is from Private Eye, but it's an article about New Crawley MP Peter Lamb. And the nub of this is about a major taxi corruption racket which took place where mostly Asian taxi drivers paid bribes in the thousands for licenses, despite the fact they could barely speak any English or navigate the local roads. This is the Private Eye article, but the key point of this article is that Crawley Council were handed dossiers of the evidence in 2015, 17 and 2020. Sussex police initially investigated, but apparently dropped the case because of insufficient evidence. But basically, Labour not really interested in bringing this to the surface. So we've got corruption at the top of the tree with regard to what's happening in Ukraine, and the trillions that are or the billions going in for the trillions to come out. And then at local level, we again see corruption by this pernicious Labour government that, of course, bears no resemblance to old Labour, which many people would like to see return to perhaps sort this out. We're in perilous times, Ben, as we look at this.
Indeed we are. I'm surprised that Clive Lewis can claim to be surprised, though. You know, he stood next to Starmer during the general election, and he's got access to the internet. He can go and look at what Starmer's been doing for the past several years, and he's been in and out of these public-private meetings for the entire time that he's been in office, even as leader of the opposition.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, of course, it gets deeper and darker because politics is not as we think.
Certainly not. And there are certainly people trying to change the face of the United Kingdom. And we're going to talk about some of them now. It relates to this organisation, Apolitical organisation. We've spoken about them a few times, first back in June and then a couple of times in October. And this is getting bigger than I possibly could have imagined, to be honest with you. They are now entering a formal strategic partnership with the British state in order to think about the future of the country. Yeah, the state is working with Apolitical Foundation to develop a future vision for the United Kingdom. Just think about that. We're going to talk about it and show you some examples of what I'm referring to. It all centres around this event which happened in Westminster last week, which is the inaugural Apolitical Day, where they are looking at how can we equip political leaders ready for the 21st century, which is an awful sentence to lead out your event with, but we'll put that aside. Who was there? A who's who of political and private sector figures, including people like Martha Lane Fox, Marvin Rees, the former mayor of Bristol, Sir Jeff Mulgan, General Sir Nick Carter, former head of the army who ran 77th Brigade during COVID, amongst other things. And the day was led out by these three ladies. So that is Pooja Warrior Hamilton on the left. She's the Chief Partnerships Officer for Apolitical Foundation. So she looks after the money, their sales pipeline. Then you have Lisa Witter, the Chief Executive of Apolitical Foundation, and Robin Scott, the CEO of Apolitical. We've spoken about both of those ladies previously. Lisa Witter focuses on politicians. Robin Scott focuses on civil servants. All three of these women are young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. This shot here was taken from a World Bank event held in Washington, D.C. over the summer. This is the best shot I have of the three of them together. And they were leading out the event in Westminster last week. We also met a few other new people. This gentleman here, Adam Parr, who is the incoming chairman of Apolitical. He's going to be starting in that position sometime in the next few months. He's the former CEO of Williams F1, the Formula One team. And actually, Formula One appears to be a very important platform for pushing out a lot of these sustainable technologies. It's worth going to have a look at what the F1 teams are doing. Before that, he was also the assistant to the chief executive and chairman at Rio Tinto, the mining conglomerate, which is very closely linked to the Rothschild family. And he opened up the day interviewing Lisa and Robin and basically saying, Lisa, Robin and I went for a walk in France in 2015 and I asked them to do something pretty much impossible, which is to transform government globally in about a decade. How does Adam Parr get to ask questions like that? Who is this guy?
Ben, you're absolutely on the button. Who are these people? How did they get their power base? Many of them, of course, as global leaders through the World Economic Forum. But think about that, a complete change of global government in 10 years. This is one of the key reasons why UK Column really pressing this issue if we want to deal with the corruption and the breakdown of politics, we've got to understand what's driving it and the time scale, because these people are trying to race ahead.
Yeah, and they're in the business end of this plan, right? So that conversation happened in 2015. We're now in 2024. That's 9 years down the track, right? So a lot of the chaos that we're seeing out there in the world is because of plans to destabilize the existing system and to implement a new system. And they're obviously doing this in a completely altruistic way. It's all well-meaning. It's all for the common good. Let's see here, Daniel Sachs, who we've spoken about previously, his view is that the historic relationship between money and power has been problematic. A lot of self-interest, a lot of lobbying, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're taking a non-partisan systems change approach. We're talking about business's role in protecting the tenets of democracy. Well, isn't that good of you, Daniel Sachs? I'm sure that there's nothing self-interested about this whatsoever. Let's just remind ourselves, by the way, that he looks after all investments for the Soros family's Open Societies Foundation. He's a senior advisor to Chatham House. He's on the European Council on Foreign Relations. This is an extraordinarily wealthy, powerful, well-connected man. And actually, this is something he's been talking about for quite some time, this idea that we've got to push for private sector and philanthropic involvement in supporting democracy. You know, that push is gaining strength. This is all part of a very well-backed, tightly managed global agenda for rich families, ultimately, and the corporations that they control to take over political systems, right? And it's being pushed across the whole of UK government. We had, and actually further afield. So this is Siobhan Haviland, and she talks about the fact that Apolitical is a segment of one, a monopoly. What an incredible business model. She's the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. And very interestingly, given what Daniel Sachs has just said about this needing to be, it's not about self-interest, it's about us trying to help. Lisa Witter actually talked about Apolitical as being a $100 billion global marketplace. This is a white space that they could potentially move into that Siobhan Haviland is very excited about for them because they've got a monopoly position in order to dominate it, right? She also worked at WPP, she worked at Disney, and she also spent some time in the Cabinet Office, and she helped to initiate Apolitical as a partner of the Cabinet Office, very, very importantly. Who else was there? A couple of celebs in for the mix. Dan Snow, the history guy, he was there to give it a little bit of BBC polish. Apparently he was on Strictly, don't you know? I don't watch Strictly. I don't own a television, unfortunately. And I certainly don't watch the BBC.
Don't apologise, Ben.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir here, I think. The whole day hinged around this showpiece discussion. By the way, you should go and watch this, right? It's 7.5 hours long. It's well worth it. I watched it yesterday, and the amount of times where I just had to stop the video, put my head in my hands and say, what is actually going on? Like, who are these people? And a lot of it centered around this discussion. Right, this was the showpiece right in the middle of the day where they were talking about updating government. Can small steps or sweeping changes save us from tech, geopolitical and climate crises, these interconnected polycrises that are causing so much consternation across the nation and certainly across central government? And this was divided up into a debate. So on the right-hand side, you had the team focused on revolution. They want a revolutionary approach to government. And on the left, you had radical incrementalism. So both of those are focused on change, importantly. So this is a progressive agenda. It's an inevitable transformation. The question is, how quickly are we going to do it? So on the side of revolution, we had General Sir Nick Carter, who actually used the term shock and awe. He said, we need to engage shock and awe tactics in order to progress this agenda. Quite a remarkable thing to hear someone like that say.
Right, and I'm just going to interject there, Ben, and say that Diane a little while ago was telling us the very sad story of somebody committing suicide as a result of woke pressures. The reality is when these people are talking about shock and awe, they mean it. They're talking about the utter breakdown of society in order to, in their terms, build back better. So very, very dangerous individual, this man. And we, as a combined audience for UK Column, need to watch him very closely.
Indeed. Now working very closely with Tony Blair. And also he's on the board of the Apolitical Foundation. So this was actually him speaking at one of his own events. We also had Jeff Mulgan there. flapping his arms around and talking a load of expensive, jargon-laden rubbish, as per usual. Not a particularly smart man, in my view, but he gets a lot of airtime. Also in the audience, Ravi Guru Murthy, CEO of Nesta, who actually used to be Jeff Mulgan's intern, apparently. That's how he started off in his career. And actually, Mulgan was the chief executive of Nesta himself. So this is a very, very small little cabal of people in central government progressing this agenda.
Ben, can I add there, Nesta, of course, years ago, alongside IDEA, alongside Common Purpose. So these have all got roots going way back.
Yeah, and in fact, Mulgan founded Demos, which shared an office with Common Purpose back in the early 90s, right?
Correct.
So this is all the same networks, the same people, and all happening under the watchful eye of top level civil servants, right? So this is something that's happening in full view of the establishment. We can see the fellow on stage there with the microphone. He came up and spoke after the debate. But by the way, the Revolution side won the debate, so the shock and awe team won. Right, and this is what they're putting forth. And this is Sir Matthew Rycroft, KCMG, CBE, top level civil servant, permanent secretary at the Home Office, one of the most powerful people in the civil service. He's been working in central government for pretty much his entire career. And he got up at the end of the debate to announce a very special new partnership between Apolitical and the British government. Let's hear what he had to say.
Apolitical are about to launch their next exciting project, which is about coming up with a national strategy, about bringing the energy that we've had in this room into the biggest challenges that our society faces, not just for the here and now, but thinking ahead 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, and drawing on all of you and the organizations that you are part of in that endeavor. And I think I'm going to hand over to Catherine and then Robin to tell you more about that next challenge.
So Apolitical Foundation have been engaged to come up with a national strategy for the UK looking 5, 10, 30 years ahead. This is total corporate state capture that we're looking at here.
Yeah.
And who came out to shed some more light on the plan? So we're going to hear now from both Catherine Day, who is Deputy Director at the Cabinet Office, who is responsible for the Foresight team, which is quite entertaining given what she's about to describe to us. So let's hear, we're going to get a few clips here from Catherine. Let's listen to the first one now.
How do we chart that path to the future that we decide that we want for our country? How do we plan for 25 years ahead when it's hard enough just to plan 5 years ahead, or 1 year, in fact? I mean, think back to the winter of 2019. Could you have imagined what the winter of 2024 would look like? So I don't have the answers to this. Nobody does.
So, Ben, she doesn't have the answers, but we're using these people in order to sort our lives out for the next 20 years. You can't make this up.
Right. And she runs Foresight for the Cabinet Office. So her job is to have a vision for the future of the country. That's literally what she's engaged to do. And she's saying, I don't know. Does anyone know? Should we just throw it out there and see what happens? I mean, that's exactly what they're doing, right? So, and they're going to do it. They've already got a plan for it. And there are two principles to this. Let's hear the first principle again from Catherine Day.
So the first principle is that the vision that we come up with for the UK in 2050 and beyond needs to be designed collaboratively. It needs to be designed and owned by all those who have a stake in the future. So people and institutions, whether from business, from academia, from civil society, from the whole of society. We need to hunt far and wide for the smartest voices, the best ideas. We absolutely mustn't assume that we know where those will come from. And we need to be smart about acting together on what they tell us. So deliberative approaches that charities like Involve, and Sarah Castell is here in the audience, these sorts of approaches are a brilliant example of how we need to sort of shape that collaboration, I think.
deliberative approaches, hunting far and wide, not assuming where the best ideas will come from, certainly not from inside the Cabinet Office, it would appear. Now let's hear the second principle from Catherine Day.
The second principle, and this harks back to our debate topic, is that we have to confront the reality that our institutions do need to change if we're going to design and deliver on that collective vision that we come up with. Some need to change incrementally, some need to change radically, and there are probably quite a lot of gaps to fill, but they all need to adapt. The system needs to change, and then it needs to carry on flexing over time. So I am incredibly glad that we've sort of come together with Apolitical, and that we are also convening a very varied group of innovative thinkers, of institutions, to help us answer and act on these incredibly hard but absolutely critical questions.
So we don't know what we're doing, we don't know where we're going, but we do know that we need to transform everything. And we're going to work with these lovely ladies from Apolitical Foundation via the World Economic Forum and all the other organisations that we've talked about in order to crack these critical questions. Now let's hear from Rubin Scott, who's going to talk about what their plan is to define the future vision for the country.
Inspired by what Catherine has set out, what Matthew has just set out, our challenge is this, and it's to those of you in the room, but this is a fairly British crowd. It's especially to those of you who are online now and the thousands of you who will see this later. Help the United Kingdom figure out how to design and deliver a vision for 2050. A vision that everyone in the country can believe in, feel hopeful about, want to work towards, and want to fight for.
So Rubin Scott has been asked to help the United Kingdom design and deliver a vision for 2050 that we can believe in, work towards, and importantly, fight for, which I think was an interesting word that's used, particularly given what we've heard already today about the war in Ukraine. Now, let's hear again from Rubin Scott as her little speech continues.
Now, if you're not in the UK, you might say, why should you care? I don't think many in our community would actually say that, but just to double click on that, you should care because this is a world first experiment, and what the UK bravely learns from it will benefit all of you, wherever you are in the world.
This is a global challenge. They are asking the entire world to help define the long-term vision for the future of the UK. Think about that. And we can't do it ourselves, apparently. Cabinet Office certainly can't do it. Apolitical can't do it on their own. They're going to ask the whole world to pitch in.
To help us out.
Unbelievable. More now from Rubin Scott. She's going to talk about the deliberative process, the first principle that Catherine Day described.
How do you design a country-level deliberative process? So we don't know the exact figures, but imagine if 1 in every 10 people in Britain got to have a say in what 2050 should look like. Imagine if you had that kind of penetration of participation. That's the scale that we're thinking of here. That will give this the credibility that is going to endure across 5 election cycles between now and 2050. I mean, what happens in one election cycle these days is tumultuous, to say the least. So just imagine what you need to endure across 5.
They're going to design a deliberative process which will only involve about 10% of the population, because that's enough. You don't need to ask everybody, just 10%, and the ones that these people select, by the way. And they're going to create a vision that will endure across 5 election cycles between now and 2050. So they're going to create this vision. It doesn't matter who gets voted in. We're still going to deliver on it, right? In the name of democracy, of course, because that's what these people are all about. Now, finally, let's hear about the institutional innovations that are going to be required, according to Rubin Scott.
The second way in which you can help is by thinking through what kind of institutional innovations And we're particularly interested in this idea of institutional incubation. How can governments start to create kind of skunk works institutions to do things that the big motherships find harder to do? Help us think through what kind of institutional innovation is needed for that.
So they're going to scrap everything, get rid of all the existing institutions, implement a load of these skunk works, innovation type organisations all around the country in order to implement this vision. This is a private company, right? Where's the civil service? Where's Starmer? You know, he's the Prime Minister. Has he not got a vision for the future of the country?
No.
Not that we've heard articulated, I don't think. And maybe this is the change agenda, the nebulous change agenda, poorly defined during the general election campaign, actually translates to this, unfortunately. And who's it being delivered to, right? We've heard a bit of the speech. Let's have a little look at the crowd here. Let's get this up on screen. Well, first of all, where is it? So this is in Church House, right? So this is one of the most important buildings owned by the Church of England, but all we've heard about is power and money, money and power. Where's the church in all of this? It's nowhere, is it? Right? You can see Christ at the top, just about there, peeking in, but there's no discussion about religion. There's no discussion about spirituality. This is all, as I just said, about money and power, right? And I don't think that's an accident. I think this is deliberate. They've done it in this room for a reason. And who is it all for? Well, look who's sitting at the front on the VIP tables. Let's zoom in. Daniel Sachs, dead centre. And then Daniel Sachs's right-hand man, Paul Alacon, who believes that the world was created for him, which, as we've spoken about previously, comes from the Babylonian Talmud, which maybe gives us a little clue as to what this is all really about.
Ben, thank you very much for that. A lot more to be said, and we could have a lot more discussion in the news. We haven't got time, but we will be getting back onto this subject in extra time today. Now, Diane, let's bring you back on. I have taken up a little bit of your time, I know, but Diane, you go through your segment. The subject is the British Library. And of course, while all this manipulation is going on that Ben's just described, ordinary people are not to be educated or read. That is all to be interfered with. So, Diane.
And the British Library appears to be participating in the destruction of knowledge or having organizations destroy its knowledge for them. I'll go into a little bit of detail. I was at the British Library. There's two locations. One is in London, one is in Yorkshire and Boston Spa. I was in London on Friday, so I went there for a few hours. The British Library, if you don't know what a national library is what's called a legal deposit library, which means that it is required to hold a copy of everything that is published in Britain. So it has over 170 million items going back, obviously, hundreds and hundreds of years. And obviously, it's very important to protect what is in the library. Unfortunately, the British Library suffered a very serious cyber attack in October of 2023, which it is still recovering from. It lost what's said to be around 600 gigabytes of data. Some of it was personal information of British Library members and readers. Some of it was documents, and most of the online services from the British Library have been offline for several months. If they're not still offline, some are still being restored. The company that seems to be responsible for this is called Recita. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's a ransomware organization that they think is based in Russia. They do all of their communications in Russians and attacks companies and organizations around the world anywhere other than Russia, essentially. And they were trying to get money to release the data back, take it off the dark web and give it back to the British Library. Unfortunately, it's the government's policy, which makes sense, to not pay for ransomware companies who steal data from government agencies and organizations. But let's look at what's going on in the British Library. I had a video that I was going to show, but let's skip the video for now and go into some of the other content that I've got here for you, because I think this is a really important thing to talk about, which I've covered previously, which is decolonization of libraries. I wrote about this in January 2024 in the Scottish Union for Education, where I explained that decolonization means that basically it's all about whiteness and white privilege, and saying that white people are colonizers, oppressors, or the settlers, and that non-white people are the oppressed. The former British Empire is presented as a prime example of colonization. But in Britain itself, people who are British are white originally, and that's goes back hundreds of years into history. So apologizing for your existence in Britain and in the British Library collections really doesn't make as much sense as it might in other places, let's say. So when the British Library reopened in September 2020, it started to put this anti-racism decolonization thing into action. And one example of this can be seen on the first floor when you enter into the British Library, these busts of famous men from British history. So of course the colonializing dead white men, so to speak, that they like to talk about. And what they have done is added descriptions to say, well, here's what these men did. They were botanists, they were physicians, they did important things, but they were also colonizers and so on. So they are kind of adding these apologetic disclaimers to the existence of some of these men that were famous in British history. There's a book that was published by the SILP organization in 2021, I believe it was published, and it has a chapter in it called Towards Decolonizing the British Library, a Staff-Led Perspective. And it goes in particular into some of these men. So here's just a couple examples of the busts of the men saying, well, yes, these were some of the colonizers, and these are the same things you can see in the first floor. And this book chapter has these full statements that they have issued apologies for what these men did that they didn't think was quite so good. If you go into the Treasures exhibition, which is a permanent exhibition in the British Library, we see amazing things. Here's the Magna Carta. I think that's worth mentioning that the Magna Carta still does exist. It has been attacked in recent months where they've tried to break through the glass, and vandalizers have tried to do that, but it's been protected. We have other amazing things that it shows early versions of Psalms written in Latin that were some of the first published Bibles, King James Bibles, and other origins as well. But some of the sort of more featured, more recent exhibitions that features in this area you actually start to see the decolonization as well as the woke agenda, the EDI agenda coming into taking over some of the collection. So Queer Lives in Literature is one of the current exhibitions talking about LGBTQ identities and so on. And they pulled out some examples from their collections to demonstrate this. For example, a man who talked about changing his gender. So we're seeing early issues of gender ideology, changing gender, wherever this happened. We see other things around homosexuality. So just bringing out that EDI agenda and the priorities that EDI is bringing out into people. There was a small exhibition on migration, talking about how migration has happened in Britain for a very long time, which of course we know, maybe not to the extent that it has now. So after I saw these exhibitions, I've been into the bookstore. And so what are the things that are being highlighted in the bookstore? Again, it's aligned again with the EDI agenda. We see Brown Girl Like Me, asylum seekers. Let's go through these pretty quickly. Black and British, It's a Continent, Afropean, Black History every day of the year. We have here Queer Women, Queer Lives, Queer London, Queer Footprints, Eco London. So there's the climate change stuff going on. We have one shelf with Keir Starmer's biography right in the center. We have a book by Tony Blair. So we see that there, even the influence on leftist politics coming out. And what else do we have? We have How to, I won't say the word, Off Men. So that's 109 things to say to shatter the male ego. Got to learn about that. And in the children's section, we have Glasgow places. We have the Black curriculum. So places in Black British history, such as Glasgow and Edinburgh, what happened in Black history. And what else do we have? We have amazing facts about Kamala Harris, which is of particular interest. I was hoping that would have gone away by now. And in the children's section, we always also have gender-swapped fairy tales. So these are the things that are being highlighted. And outside the British Library, there were these posters all over the street, right outside St. Pancras Station, King's Cross, London Euston, Socialist Ideas to Change the World, Marxism Weekender. So this coming weekend, if you're not going to a peace march or something important, you can go hear about socialist ideas down in London as advertised outside the British Library. So feel free to go to that.
Clearly targeted attack on people. We're not going to get knowledge from libraries. We're simply going to get reframing propaganda in order that we will sit back while these other companies, Apolitical, as Ben's described, decide our future. This is what is going to happen unless excuse me, we stand up and we challenge this system and we expose this system. And we very much hope that today UK Column News has shone a light on some of these subjects, and that effectively gives you the weapon to lift the stones and call it out. But this is coming in very quickly, and we can see the scale of the operation. Big companies, trillions of pounds at work, but ultimately it's to destroy the present environment in order to build back better. But it's in their model, not in one we'd want. We have to end there. I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. And as always, a huge thanks to the people kind enough to donate and support UK Column financially. We can only do what we do with your help, and it is very much appreciated. Now, if you're a member of UK Column, stay with us, because in a few minutes we'll have UK Column Extra. Otherwise, the news will be back at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.